Willkommen, this is Julia.
And this is Shane, who misses Think Plant-Based. Think Plant-Based. Make sure to check out recipes, health tips, travel tips at www.thinkplantbased.com.
And we're officially on iTunes, so please rate and write us a review on iTunes.
Write us a review. Give us 2 stars, 3 stars, maybe 5 stars. Let us know.
For sure, 5.
Yeah, I mean, who would give us 2 stars anyways, right? But yeah, make sure to do that because that's how we get found.
Looking for amazing vegan vitamins?
Hate swallowing pills like I do?
Try Herbaland Gummies.
Get 15% off all orders when using discount code ThinkPlantBased15 at checkout.
Make sure to head over to herbaland.com. That is herbaland.com.
So here we are again, back. Think Plant-Based.
Yeah.
Julia and Shane, Shane and Julia.
And with Melanie Joy today.
We got a special guest, Melanie Joy. Welcome.
Hey, hi. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
We're so excited to have you. It's such an honor. You know, we heard great stories about you, and now we have you here.
Yeah.
So please tell the audience more about yourself and about your vegan journey.
Well, I guess my vegan journey, my work is very much based on my own vegan journey. Probably like most people's work comes from their own journey. Like many people, I grew up in the United States and like many people in the US and in many places in the world, in fact. I grew up with a dog who I loved like a family member. I certainly grew up as a person who cared about animals and would never want to cause them to suffer. And I also grew up eating animals, eating meat, eggs, and dairy. And, for so much of my life, over the course of so many years and so many meals, I just never thought about how strange it was, right? That I could pet my dog with one hand while I ate a pork chop with the other, a pork chop that had once been an animal who was at least as sensitive and sentient and intelligent as my dog. I just didn't connect the dots. And what happened was that one day in 1989, I was 23 years old at the time, and I ate a hamburger that turned out to be contaminated with Campylobacter, which is like the red meat version of salmonella, the salmonella of the red meat world. And I got really, really sick, and I wound up actually hospitalized on intravenous antibiotics. And after that, the thought of eating meat disgusted me. And so I stopped eating meat. And in my mind, it wasn't really for any, it didn't seem like there was any ethical out by the last food I had eaten before getting so sick. And so I had to learn about my new diet, and I had to learn how to cook for myself and how to shop for myself. And, as I was learning about, at the time it was vegetarianism, and then shortly thereafter it became a vegan diet and lifestyle, I, of course, stumbled upon information about animal agriculture, and what I learned, it just shocked and horrified me. I couldn't believe the extent of the suffering of non-human animals. I couldn't believe the environmental damage. I was also learning about human health impacts of eating a carnistic diet or a plant-based, an animal-based diet. And this was back in the 80s, right? This was 89. So there wasn't even a lot of awareness at the time. But what I was learning really shocked and horrified me. But what shocked me in some ways even more was that nobody I talked to about what I was learning was willing to hear what I had to say. The response was always something like, "Don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal." Or they call me a crazy vegan hippie propagandist. And this was the response pretty consistently, from people who were just like I had been when I was eating animals, right? It was just people who were rational, people who were compassionate. And I just became very curious as to how, people who cared about animals and cared about their impact on others and on the environment and so on and so forth could nevertheless act against these values and act against their own interests and the interests of others without fully realizing what they were doing. And so this was really what led me to do the research that I did. And I ended up getting a PhD in psychology, and I specialized in the psychology of violence and nonviolence. And more specifically, for my doctoral dissertation, I researched the psychology of eating animals.
Right. Wow, that's a pretty deep study there, right?
It is.
Yeah, it's not one you really hear about a lot of the times. So we'll get into some questions here. Why do vegans and non-vegans struggle with the relationships and communication with each other, you think?
Well, I guess picking up from the journey that I was just describing to you, what I discovered kind of helped shed light on this question that you've asked. What I uncovered in my research is that there's an invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals. And this is the belief system that I came to call carnism. Carnism is essentially the opposite of veganism, right? We tend to believe that only vegans and vegetarians follow a belief system when it comes to eating animals. But the only reason that we learn to eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because, we do learn to follow a belief system when it comes to eating animals. And so this belief system of carnism basically needs to coerce people who care about animals and who care about practicing integrity to act against that caring without fully realizing what they're doing. And it does this through distorting their perceptions. It uses a set of psychological defense mechanisms to distort people's perceptions when it comes to meat, eggs, dairy, and the animals they eat. And also when it comes to how they think about veganism and vegans. It distorts people's perceptions so that they eat animals, certain animals, without really realizing what they're doing. I mean, carnism, for example, causes us to look at a hamburger, if we're not vegan yet, right? To look at a hamburger and see it as delicious food, right? But if we were told that hamburger, or a meat eater or non-vegan was told that hamburger was from a golden retriever, they would no longer see it as food. They would see it as a dead animal and be totally disgusted. So this causes all sorts of problems for individuals, right, who really want to make their food choices freely, but don't realize that they're not because they're under the influence of this invisible system. Clearly causes problems for the animals as well. And it causes problems when a non-vegan who's basically operating with this carnistic mentality, as I call it, is in relationship with a vegan. Because what carnism does, carnism is a system of oppression. It's organized around oppression, violence, harm, and it requires people who would normally never want to support oppression to directly support it. Right. And so what carnism does is it conditions people to just really disconnect from their thoughts and feelings when it comes to eating animals. And it conditions people to feel defensive against anything that threatens their feeling of entitlement to eat animals. So this is often vegans. In other words, carnism causes people to feel defensive against or resistant to any information and anyone who delivers that information that would help them get outside the carnistic box. So you have, in many instances, you have this sort of automatic defensiveness that many people bring to their relationships, many non-vegans bring to their relationships with vegans. And on the other side, you have vegans who bring their own psychology into the relationship. And, many people, I know a lot of your listeners are vegan and can probably relate to what I'm talking about here. Becoming vegan is, for many people, a tremendously empowering experience, and it's an incredibly important experience, no question. And at the same time, it also can be very difficult, very challenging. Once you wake up to the fact that you are living in the midst of what can only be called a global atrocity. Carnism is a global catastrophe. It is a global atrocity. Once you wake up to this reality, your life is never the same. And being awake in this way, living as a vegan in a dominant animal eating culture, takes a tremendous toll on us psychologically and emotionally, inevitably. We have empathy, we care, we know what's happening to the animals, to the environment, and yet we can work our entire lives trying to pick up the pieces of the mess that other people are being made, other people are making, and not only are we never thanked, but we're often even ridiculed, and scorned for it. So there's just a lot of psychological gymnastics that we have to go through as vegans to cope with the fact that we live in the midst of insanity, essentially. And many vegans feel this incredible sense of urgency to communicate this message, and to help other people wake up to do everything that they can to stop the bloodshed, essentially. And yet at the same time, their voices so often fall, people don't hear what they're saying and are so resistant to what they're saying that it really can mess with your mind, and it can really cause a tremendous amount of frustration. Many vegans end up feeling, burned out, angry, misanthropic. They become traumatized from seeing, all of this footage about what's happening to the animals. So you have these two psychologies, that come together. And it's a very, very difficult combination. And the backdrop for all of this is that vegans are people, and non-vegans are people. And people in general get pretty much no formal training in how to have healthy relationships and how to communicate in a way that's effective. So even without the vegan, non-vegan difference in relationships, most people really struggle to relate to each other in a way that is compassionate, respectful, and effective, and to communicate clearly. So it's really a recipe for, quite a challenging experience when you've got a vegan and a non-vegan in a relationship. And it's also a tremendous opportunity to foster healthy, authentic connections with each other. It almost forces you to do that work, because you kind of have to do that work if you want to make it, make it happen.
Totally.
Yeah,
I find being vegan made me stronger. I mean, I realized more struggles, but I knew why I'm doing it. And I find that's very important too. Mm-hmm. Why are you vegan? Is it just a trend, or is it for the animals? Is it for your health? There needs to be a motivation behind it too, to keep on going, or you fall back to eating meat. Some people do that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, you're absolutely right. It can be very lonely for many vegans. A lot of vegans just feel so isolated because carnism is invisible still to most people anyway. Mm-hmm. We don't recognize the carnistic mentality for what it is. We don't recognize this defensive mentality for what it is, even whether you're vegan or non-vegan. And we don't recognize the bias that runs through the dominant culture. So, for example, vegans are called biased whenever we try to challenge the bias of the dominant culture that's already there. Most people don't realize, for instance, that when you study nutrition, you're actually studying carnistic nutrition. You're born into this bias. So there are all these ways that carnism distorts perception so that the world continues to support carnism. And a lot of these distortions are, or I should say, a lot of these carnistic defenses are directed at discrediting vegans and the vegan movement. So let me explain this a little bit. Systems like carnism, systems of oppression, they keep themselves alive basically by making sure that they stay stronger than the system that challenges them. So carnism needs to keep itself stronger than veganism. And to this end, we learn in the dominant culture a series of myths. We learn to believe in a series of myths, and all of these myths teach us two things. One is that eating animals is the right thing to do. It's valid. Those are the myths that keep carnism strong. They strengthen carnism. We also learned to believe in myths that weaken veganism. So we learn that not eating animals is the wrong thing to do. And one of the ways these myths get represented is through promoting negative vegan stereotypes. Right. So we learn to believe a bunch of myths about vegans, right? Vegans are biased. Vegans are overly emotional, sentimental animal lovers. Have you ever heard that one?
Kind of.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, probably.
You're just too sensitive.
Oh, yeah.
You're just too sensitive, right? So, what we don't recognize is that our emotions of sadness or grief or moral outrage at the atrocity that is carnism are actually healthful, appropriate, legitimate responses to the fact that we are witnessing a global atrocity. Much more concerning is the widespread numbing the dominant culture. But we learn to believe in these, these myths about vegans as a form of or these negative stereotypes about vegans as a form of, as a way to discredit the vegan message. It's a form of shooting the messenger. If we shoot the messenger, we don't have to take seriously the implications of their message.
Totally. What we hear mostly is a lot of people eat meat. Why should I become vegan then?
Yeah.
They don't want to miss out on the food, so it's
It's a cultural, herd mentality, I think, formulation.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone wants to fit in, right? So if you're the outcast, you're just going to be pushed out of the circle of society almost, right?
In a way, yeah. People
Right. They make it's normal to eat animals. We learn to believe these myths that it's normal, natural, and necessary to eat animals, for example. And then when we break outside of this, we're ostracized or marginalized sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really hard.
It's a hard world out there for a vegan.
It is, to be honest.
Fighting the oppressor. Yeah.
But you talk about vegan allies, right? We need them too. What is a vegan ally, and why is this subject important?
A vegan ally is the term I use to describe somebody who's not yet fully vegan themselves, but who is a supporter of veganism as an ideology and of vegans, right? So we tend to assume in the vegan movement that either you're vegan and you're part of the solution, or you're not vegan and you're part of the problem. And the problem with this framing, it's understandable for a lot of reasons, but the problem with this framing is that it prevents 99% of the population from supporting a cause that really needs all the help it can get. And many people are simply not ready or able or willing, essentially, to just go vegan.
Right.
And yet they are still very sympathetic to the vegan cause. And most people transition to veganism slowly. They move along the spectrum toward veganism and, build veganism to their lives over time. So if we give people the opportunity to help support the cause when they're not 100% vegan yet, then we invite a lot of support into the movement. So for example, some of the people who have done the most actually for the movement and to help animals in terms of impact, in my personal experience, are not vegans themselves. Right. Mm. They are, for example, journalists who interview me and whose or radio interviews or television interviews reach hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of viewers. They're not vegan yet, but they really believe in the cause and they want to use their influence to help. Right. Some of the people who donate to my organization, Beyond Carnism, we're 100% dependent on donations, and some of the people who donate to us are not vegan, but they want to help create a more vegan world. So they give us the means necessary to do the work that we do. I encourage people, to really, when I'm talking about becoming vegan, I try to invite people to be vegan allies, and also to be as vegan as possible. Right. Often our call to action is go vegan. And that's challenging for people. But if we encourage people to be as vegan as possible, a vegan ally is somebody who would be as vegan as possible and help in whatever way they can. People can't be more vegan than what's possible for them anyway. And It's just a much easier and more gracious and generous and respectful ask.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
No one wants to be forced to do anything, right? Same with trying out vegan, I guess.
And we can't force people. Right. Legislation forces people, but advocacy does not. Advocacy is about communicating in a way that increases the chances that your message will be heard the way that you intend it to be. And the more you try to force somebody, the more they feel controlled and the more they resist what you're saying.
So true.
Yeah.
But sometimes also people get the image of being vegan, eventually you won't be healthy anymore. The longer you're vegan, then it doesn't work. There's no scientific proof that it works on
generation after generation.
Yeah. People get so caught up with that, right? Because it's still, as you mentioned many times, it's a young movement and we don't really know much about it. So people get kind of caught up, right, with that.
Yeah, I mean,
Sort
as a
of.
social justice movement, it's young, but it's not that young. I mean, people have been practicing ethical vegetarianism for at least 3,500 years.
Right.
You know, some of the world's oldest religions are, you know, based on what is essentially veganism. You know, eating a plant-based diet. So, you know, there's like Jainism, for example, and, you know, Hindus have been historically vegetarians. So there are plenty of long-lived vegetarians and vegans. And today there's just a tremendous amount of literature demonstrating the benefits of a plant-based diet and the dangers of a carnistic diet. So what I have observed, in my travels, I've traveled to about 50 countries now, having this conversation with all different types of people in, you know, the mainstream media, and also people in positions of leadership in the vegan movement. And this myth that you can't be healthy eating a plant-based diet is really rapidly losing steam.
Right.
Or losing support, I should say. It's not, I mean, in different places in the world, it's got a greater or lesser amount of support. I mean, some places where the movement really is young, people still do believe that if you stop eating meat, you're going to die. But in a lot of places now, that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just whatever, I guess, someone believes. I mean, you could read a book and it, you know, if that's the side they're selling and you just believe it, then I guess that's where you get from. But it really depends, I guess, on the person and their belief system, right? We all have different belief systems.
Or certain influencers, right? They talk about how bad veganism is. It didn't work for them. And then they influence other people, like the audience, right? It's pretty interesting how even social media works today. Like, it actually spreads veganism in a good way.
Yeah.
But then the carnivore diet gets very popular now too, especially here in North America, I find, you know. But then is it really working too, the carnivore diet? We don't know. There's so much confusion, right? And you need to pick what works for you, I find. Yeah.
I mean, and also people who genuinely want to do less harm to animals, you know, don't have to be convinced that a vegan diet is the healthiest diet they could possibly have. They just have to be convinced that they could be healthy enough on vegan diet, which we know. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of evidence supporting this today. It's interesting because when I'm back in the U.S. now, I live in Europe now. And when I travel back, I mean, it's just changed so much in the U.S. support for veganism. When I first went vegan, you know, I said I was 23 years old. It was 1989, and you know, my mother thought I was going to die before my 30th birthday. You know, people would say you're vegan, and they looked at me like I had two heads. And now, when I meet people in the U.S. and I say I'm vegan, it's always completely different response. I mean, first of all, my mother is 80 and she's gone late 70s, 80. She's gone vegan in the past several years.
Wow.
You know, partly for animal rights reasons and also partly for her health. And she's like very much an advocate of veganism. So there's a big, you know, when I go back now, people will, you know, say, oh, you're vegan. Oh, that's why you're so healthy, or that's why you look so young, or I wish I could do that. That's great. Good on you. It's a completely different response than it was when I first went vegan.
Yeah.
Wow.
Totally.
What a change.
Yeah. So what are some tips that you can give people about having effective communication with non-vegans, I believe?
Yeah, well, I think this one tip actually, a couple of things. It's really my book, Beyond Beliefs, a guide to improve relationships and communication for vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters, is really meant to be sort of a one-stop guide to how to practice healthy ways of relating, especially when you have this potential ideological difference. But you can also apply the principles and tools I share in that book to vegan relationships as well, because as you might know, vegans don't always get along with other vegans, or any kinds of relationships, I should say.
Right.
When you do have a difference in your relationship, this particular difference, veganism and carnism, essentially, it's really important to get informed. It's really important to understand these different ways of thinking, these different ways of life. It's very important for non-vegans to try to understand carnism. I have a chapter in the book for non-vegans and vegans about carnism and how carnism hijacks the relationship, essentially. When a vegan is in a relationship with a non-vegan, they're essentially in a relationship of three, not of two. There's the vegan, the non-vegan, and carnism. Carnism is present in the relationship with you. Oh. And so rather than, seeing each other as opponents, that's what carnism does. It causes vegans and non-vegans to see each other as opponents. Right. It's important to recognize that the real problem is carnism, and you can unite against this intruder in the relationship. So one step is just building awareness of carnism, how it distorts perceptions, how it causes non-vegans to feel automatically defensive against vegans, some of the myths that it creates in our minds. Another important tip is to focus more on the process than on the content of a communication. And so this is a tip that applies to any communication. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about veganism or whether to go in or stay out on a Saturday night. Every conversation, every communication has these two parts. It has the content, which is what we're communicating about, and it has the process, which is how we're communicating. Right. People tend to over-focus on the content and under-focus on the process, but the process actually matters more. So, for example, if you think about a conversation that you had like maybe a week ago or maybe even 6 months ago, it's possible that you have forgotten the content entirely. You don't even remember what you talked about anymore, but you probably still remember how you felt in that conversation. Right. Mm-hmm. The process determines how you feel. So when your process is healthy, you can talk about anything without arguing. And when your process is unhealthy, you can't talk about anything without arguing. You might know people who are like really on the same page, but they'll always find a reason to argue with each other. Yeah. In a healthy process, when your process is healthy, your goal is not to be right, which means to make the other person wrong. It's not to win, which means to make the other person lose. Your goal is mutual understanding. Right. It's to understand the other person's thoughts and feelings and to have the other person understand your thoughts and feelings. So to create a healthy process, you need to, number one, commit to this goal. And it doesn't mean that you don't want a particular outcome at some point, but the first step has to be mutual understanding. And to create a healthy process, not only do you need to have this as your goal, and if you notice in a conversation that you're starting to get stressed, and check, pause, and ask yourself, is this other person seeming to be pushing an agenda on me to be right, or am I trying to be right in this conversation? And then recognize the formula for a healthy process, and it is based on two parts. One is practicing integrity, and the other is honoring dignity. And this, by the way, it applies beyond even communication. It applies to all of our interactions and relationships. Sure. So the formula for healthy relating, healthy communicating is the same. Communicating is just the primary way we relate. It's practice integrity, and integrity, by definition, is the integration of our values and behaviors. So when you practice integrity, you practice the two core moral values are compassion and justice. Right. So you practice compassion towards somebody else, or justice, which is fairness. So if I'm practicing integrity toward you, I'm treating you with compassion, and I'm treating you in a way that's fair. It's basically being respectful. So practice integrity and honor dignity. When you honor someone's dignity, that means you think of them and treat them in a way that shows, you think of them as though they have fundamental worth as a being on this planet. They are no less worthy of being alive or being treated with respect than anyone else on this planet. Right. So when you practice integrity and you honor dignity, the result is an increased sense of connection and an increased sense of security in that interaction, in that relationship. And if you think about your own experiences in your life, think about a relationship that you feel is a pretty good relationship. Maybe it's your relationship, right? That you feel is a pretty good relationship. Chances are you feel connected. Chances are you feel secure with each other. Mm-hmm. Chances are you trust that the other person is going to practice integrity toward you. And chances are you feel that that other person sees you as being worthy of being treated with integrity, of being treated with respect. And if you think about the opposite, right, if you think about a relationship in your life that's like not a good relationship, or even just an interaction, this formula applies to everything. It applies to a brief interaction with the cashier at the grocery store. It applies to an online troll communicating with you. It applies to long-term relationships. It applies to how we relate to other animals. Right. It applies to how social groups relate. It applies to how we relate to ourselves. We're always talking to ourselves and relating to ourselves, right? Chances are, if you think about a relationship that you have that's not a great relationship, maybe it's a troll, online, you probably notice that they don't practice integrity towards you. So they violate their integrity, and right. They harm your dignity. And this causes you to feel disconnected from them and insecure with them. So this is the formula for a healthy process. This is a formula that you can revisit at any moment in your day, when you're in a communication, when you're in an interaction, when you're just thinking about your relationship in general. And you can ask yourself, if you're feeling stressed, you feel like something's off, you can ask yourself, wow, am I really practicing integrity here? Do I feel like this other person is practicing integrity to me? Do I feel connected? Do I feel secure? And then you can, change your behaviors accordingly. My newest book is second newest book, it came out this year, is called Getting Relationships Right. And it's really a one-stop guide to improving relationships and communication. I talk about this and really how to apply this formula throughout that book.
Right.
Wow, super interesting. We really need that, because sometimes we get so caught up when someone is mad at us or yells at us, right? We get mad too.
It's tunnel vision where you don't see anything. It's just, totally. Trying to hurt that person, and you're not even thinking of what you're saying anymore. Yeah,
right. We want to be heard, and like veganism and animals are suffering and all this stuff, especially when the first years I was vegan, was like, so I wanted everyone to know. I even had like little booklets, why vegan, in my bag. And I was like giving it out whenever someone asked me, why are you vegan? Because you would hear that all the time. And I got tired of justifying myself why I'm vegan. I just wanted to be a normal person. We don't ask people why do they eat meat, right? But for vegans, I always felt like we had we have to justify where are you getting your protein? Yeah. Like all of a sudden people act like the nutritionists, the experts. Oh, why do you have to supplement? That can't be natural,
And you're totally, you make great points. And as you said, Shane, sometimes, you just you're triggered, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you're talking about. You're triggered. You're just so upset. You're basically hijacked, at which point it feels impossible to apply this formula. Yeah. So, and that's true. It's very, one of the things that's really important is to recognize, we all know how important this formula is, at the same time, most of us don't apply it on a consistent basis. And so an important step is awareness. What is it that gets in the way of us treating others and ourselves in a way that will create a greater sense of connection and security, so that we have the kinds of relationships and communication we want. And for vegans, and, for people, there are so many different answers to that question, right? One big piece for vegans that I think is really important to be aware of is the impact of witnessing and being aware of the violence inherent in carnism. Many vegans do not realize the impact that this has on them psychologically and emotionally, and it is one of the reasons that they can end up going from 0 to 100 in a conversation.
Right.
there, frustration builds up, of course, and, a lot of vegans know what it feels like to be chronically disrespected, because unfortunately it still is socially acceptable to talk to and about vegans in a way that would be considered completely inappropriate to talk to, other people of other ideological groups.
Right.
And it's hard, and sometimes our anger is it's a valid, legitimate response to being treated in a way that's not just, that's not fair. Anger is, a lot of vegans struggle with anger. And it's important to have an understanding of what anger is, and how to process anger and relate to anger in a way that's healthy, so it doesn't become a problem for us as vegans or as people, really. Our anger is a normal and a healthy response to injustice, to experiencing or witnessing injustice or unfairness. Our anger is a sign that our moral compass is working.
Right.
And it inspires us, it empowers us to stand up against injustice and take action. When we relate to our anger in a healthy way, that means we recognize our anger for what it is, an indication that something might be an injustice. It's not always an injustice. It might be our perception, that something's an injustice.
Right.
But when we relate to our anger in a healthy way, it means we recognize it for what it is, an emotion that suggests that we are witnessing an injustice or experiencing an injustice. When we relate to our anger in an unhealthy way, that means that we are blended with it sometimes, meaning that our anger has consumed us, hijacked us, basically. We're looking at the world through the lens of our anger. We're not recognizing it simply as an emotion that is giving us information about our experience that is important for us to be curious about and learn from, but rather we and the anger become one, right? And so we're not able to think as rationally. And when we relate to our anger in an unhealthy way, it has the charge of contempt. So contempt is an indication that we've placed ourselves in a position of moral superiority. We're looking at somebody as morally inferior, as being less worthy of being treated with respect than we or anybody else on the planet is. So you're a bad person, therefore you're less than. You don't deserve to be treated with respect. Contempt is a red flag, that we are buying into this illusion that we are somehow morally superior or more worthy of being treated with respect than anybody else on this planet. And so that's really important to become aware of. We can also experience contempt toward ourselves. Right. And a lot of us beat ourselves up, look down on ourselves, shame ourselves. Shame is the flip side of contempt. Shame is the feeling of being inferior or less than, and contempt is the feeling of being superior or better than. Both of these emotions are red flags that we are not practicing the formula I talked about earlier.
Right.
They're both red flags. We can be angry at somebody's behavior without perceiving them as somehow being an inferior being, and ourselves as being superior to them, morally superior to them. Right. So it's important for vegans to be aware of this, because if not, when we're not, it's important for people to be aware of it. But when we're advocates and we're promoting a moral issue or an ethical issue, it can be easy to fall into this pattern of thinking, this way of thinking. And it really harms us as vegans, and it harms others too. And vegans also can be subject to being traumatized from witnessing the suffering that they've witnessed. And when you're seeing what's happening to the animals, you can develop a form of PTSD from that. It's actually called STSD, secondary traumatic stress disorder, or sometimes it's just called secondary traumatic stress. And there are lots of problems with developing secondary traumatic stress, but it causes you to have less control. I don't want to say control. It causes you to relate to your anger and other emotions in a way that's not healthy. And it can really lead you to burning out and to taking other people down with you if you're not mindful of how you're interacting with them. Right.
Yeah, I find it hard when we go to a supermarket. There's like these fish tanks, and there are a bunch of like crabs and lobsters, and I mean, almost every week you see a new load coming in, and they're stacked up, you know. Sometimes I see like people ordering it fresh, right, and then they get slaughtered fresh there. But that's like very traumatic for me, and I don't even sometimes know how to handle it. And for me, I can't stand it just to ignore the truth. I know it's harsh, but I'm a person, I like to see the truth. I like to see what's going on. Or when I'm in Hong Kong, you know, I saw turtles getting slaughtered on the side of the road. But I want to see all this stuff, you know, even if it's traumatic. It's
a reminder for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I tell other people about it. But yeah, I don't want to see it all the time. It feels not good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the problem with witnessing, the problem is that, I mean, if you're already a part of the solution, if you're already working to change the problem, you don't need to feed the trauma that is already inside of you. Because you re-traumatize yourself. And we have a movement that's full of walking trauma survivors right now, because a lot of vegans feel a sense of obligation, and they feel somehow like witnessing what's happening is helping the animals. But what it often is doing is causing us to be increasingly frustrated, feeling hurt and helpless, and feeling grief and traumatized, so that we're less effective ambassadors for the cause.
Totally.
And one of the key reasons that people burn out is because they over-witness, and vegans often also make others unintentional witnesses. You know, they talk about the terrible things that they've seen to other vegans or to other individuals who, you know, then end up taking it in and catching that trauma. Like, they've done studies, you know, trauma is contagious. When people hear about traumatic material from somebody else, or even when they just interact with somebody who's traumatized, they can start taking on the qualities or characteristics of trauma themselves. So we have to be really careful as a movement to limit the amount of witnessing we do of this really graphic material, because if we don't, we are at risk of burning out. And even if we don't burn out, we become increasingly misanthropic and increasingly dysregulated, emotionally dysregulated. That means that we struggle to regulate our emotions. And, you know, so a lot of vegans I've talked to over the years have said they feel like they feel guilty if they stop witnessing and seeing. And they think the least I can do, given what the animals are going through, the least I can do is to spend 2 minutes and see what's happening to them. But I don't. That's not actually helping the animals. You watching is not helping the animals. I'm not saying you, but, you know, watching is not helping the animals if it's feeding your trauma. It's causing you to be more traumatized, which ends up causing you to be a less effective ambassador for the animals, for most people anyway. So one of the things I have suggested to vegans in the past, and this is not true for everybody, of course, you know, your experience might be very different, but for many vegans, it's the trauma for many people. What happens is that, you know, you think of this trauma as an entity that's taken up residence inside of you, and it wants to keep itself alive. And the way that it keeps itself alive is by convincing you to feed it with more material that feeds your trauma, and making you feel guilty when you stop doing that. And one of the problems with doing this is that when we are traumatized, it affects us in a whole variety of ways. But one way that it affects us is by causing us to start thinking differently than we did before we became traumatized. It causes us to start to look at the world as though it's one gigantic traumatic event with only 3 roles to be played. Because in a trauma, there are only 3 roles to be played. You can either be a perpetrator, or you can be a victim. And if you're not a perpetrator or a victim, then you're a hero. And what we do when we become traumatized is we start placing everybody, including ourselves, into one of these 3 roles. And we lose our capacity for nuance, for the gray areas. So you can see this, right? You guys might have seen this in the vegan movement with, you know, vegans creating vegan heroes, you know, and like
all the time.
Or we all go and watch the same, like, slaughterhouse footage, which we already know what's going on in there, but the whole room's full of vegans. I don't understand that concept. To me, it just seems weird, but yeah, it's just feeding the trauma, I feel, for me. So I try to not go to as many.
Yeah, it does. And there's a way that like there's almost a natural tendency to want to feed it. And at the same time, it's really important not to. And some vegans have said to me, not some, a lot of vegans have said to me, I'm afraid that if I stop watching, I'm going to stop caring. And, and I would say to them, give yourself permission to let your trauma go. That's your trauma talking, in my opinion. Just because, once you know, you will never unknow. Just because you stop feeling trauma doesn't mean you don't have empathy anymore. Right. If you're a person with empathy and a person who's aware of what's happening, you're never going to go back to the way that you used to be. The difference is that you will, come to your activism from a place of mindfulness and of self-connection and of empowerment, not from a place of trauma. When we come to our activism from a place of trauma, it has that burning sense of urgency, that edge, that desperation, and that tendency to turn people into the bad guy, to look for the perpetrator and take them down.
Right. Yeah, basically like the story of, like you said, the protagonist, the antagonist. We have to find someone to fight against, even though they might not even really be the enemy. They're just happen to be in carnism, as you say, like just controlling them. Yeah. I
just find it sometimes like upsetting when I see animals suffering that so many people don't know about it, and I feel like I wish I could do more. That's like what makes me feel upset. And really, like, I wish I could do more, and I wish more people would know about it, because I still feel sometimes I live in this vegan bubble. Oh, there's so many vegan products, and I have these vegan friends. But I don't want to live in a vegan bubble. I want to see the reality so I can see what I can change, and where people are still lacking. Like, people are lacking in communication a lot, right? And we learned a lot from you how to communicate properly. And I wish more people would be open to just communicate properly to people. I think that's where we can reach more veganism to people, and not in a religious way. No, like spreading the truth, how animals are suffering.
I find that people even know the truth, and they still just don't want to face the truth.
We have that all the time where people
all the time. I know a lot of people know what's going on.
Yeah,
they just don't want to know what's going on with their eyes closed.
Yeah, they tell you like, it's really bad how animals are suffering, and then the next day they're eating the steak.
They know about it. They're already speaking like they're, vegan ally, and then they go ahead and just continue on with what they're used to.
I know. Yeah. I mean, people don't change until they're ready to change. I mean, one of the nice things about asking people to be as vegan as possible is it makes it easier for them to change. They don't feel like it's this all or nothing thing. Like, I'm not going to allow myself to really know on a deep level because I'm not ready to totally change. I'm afraid that if I do, I'll lose my relationships or my friendships, or I'll be the weird person in my group or whatever. But if they know that they can be as vegan as possible and be a part of the solution, then they're much more likely to be open to taking in these ideas. And the truth is, unfortunately, there are like 8 billion or so people alive in the world today. And a lot of those people are not yet ready to hear this truth. But a lot of them are. And that's why it's important for us to really make sure that we're strategic in the kind of outreach we're doing. I mean, do you want to spend, month after month trying to get your Uncle Bob to finally go vegan? I know there's a heart of gold in there. If I can just get through to Uncle Bob, I'll have succeeded.
Heard that many times,
but do we want to spend our energy there, or focus on the low-hanging fruits? For every person who says I could never do that, or they're at the McDonald's drive-through the day after watching Earthlings or whatever, there are a lot of people who are very open and very receptive. And, for all vegans, I really encourage them to, if you really care, and most people become vegan because they really do care. They care deeply, and they really want to be as effective as possible with the short time they have here on the planet. Right. And one of the most important things to do is to learn how to be as effective as possible. Advocacy, most people get no training whatsoever in how to communicate and how to be an advocate. But the information is out there. we established the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy for this particular reason. I have a handful of books that are designed specifically to help vegans, and they can also be used to help non-vegans learn how to communicate and relate effectively, and how to make strategic decisions when you're deciding whether to communicate and, what kind of outreach even to do. So I really encourage people who feel passionately and want to make a difference to invest the time in developing the skills to be able to be as effective an ambassador as you can be. Because if you can increase your effectiveness even by 10%, and most people, given that they've gotten no training whatsoever, don't just increase their effectiveness by 10% when they start learning. They double it, triple it, they exponentially increase their effectiveness. If you can do that, you will make a much bigger difference for the movement, for the animals.
That's great. Yeah, totally makes sense. Mm-hmm. I actually have another question about what's the psychology behind when someone becomes vegan because of animal rights, but then after 2 decades decides to eat meat again. Like, I know there's so many factors, but what's usually your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the person. The dominant culture, the dominant carnistic culture, is really structured to make it very easy for people to slip back into the carnistic cocoon of unknowing. I mean, the whole culture is structured to make it easier to eat animals. It's more normal to eat animals. It's like more convenient to eat animals. It's your friendships get easier often, your social relationships. Right. So for some people, there is this constant or this ongoing pressure to conform back into the carnistic norm. Right. And nobody is immune to that, really. And people in particular who don't have enough support. I've met a number of vegans who just, feeling just so disconnected from other vegans, so disconnected from the vegan community, and were so under assault from the people around them who didn't understand them, who, often just ostracized them, maybe even ridiculed them, that it was just too hard for them to continue. Now, fortunately, this is something that's really changing, because there are online communities that people can be a part of if they're not living in, an area where they can actually meet in person other vegans. And it's another reason that we, I believe, need to really commit to making this movement as resilient as possible. A resilient movement is secure and connected. As I was talking about before, it's the formula again. If our movement is more resilient, people will want to stay in it. They will feel connected to the vegan community, and that will probably significantly reduce the chances that people want to leave the community and go back to eating animals. Studies have shown that when people stop being vegan or stop being active, one of the key reasons is because they have had negative experiences in their workplaces, vegan workplaces, or a vegan community.
Right. That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
It's just, it's hard when they already know, like I said, they already know it, but they just want to keep those eyes shut. And yeah, it's a hard one.
It is, yeah. I mean, we're constantly changing, right? Like our personality or in general, right? So people make decisions, good or bad. I mean, it's up to them.
It's their choice, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Well, it's also like, change for animals, change is like the kind of change that we're working towards is not the kind of change that happens one person at a time. A lot of vegans get really upset about one person who's stopped being vegan. But really, if we want to change the world and we're serious about changing the world, we need to change institutions. We need to get, plant-based meats manufactured more effectively. We need to really influence key influencers. People are individuals, and 1, 2, 3, 50, 100, 1,000 vegans, who stop being vegan is probably not going to have a significant impact on the trajectory of this movement.
Right.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And you're located in Berlin right now, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I moved to Berlin about 6.5 years ago.
Oh, nice.
wow.
I actually was born there.
Yeah,
I grew up
Julia's
there.
born and raised there.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
yeah.
go back often,
Oh,
actually.
yeah, we
Yeah,
do.
we love going
And
back.
actually, my sister and I, we know your husband, Sebastian, like when we became vegan, like in 2000, he was part of Weibo and we became friends and stuff. So it's so nice to see that you guys got married, such a perfect couple,
Oh.
power couple.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I remember Vapo in the old days. So, well, maybe when we can all travel again, we'll see you here in Berlin one
Sure.
day.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
nice.
that'd be
Lovely.
great.
And do you have any future plans? We would like to know.
And where can the listeners find you?
They can come to our website is carnism.org. And the books that I mentioned to you are available on carnism.org, and veganadvocacy.org will take people directly to our Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy if they're interested in learning about our advocacy trainings and webinars.
Great. And
Okay.
are you writing any more books in the future, or are you doing any online events?
Yes, we're doing a number of online events. We just actually had the first workshop for vegans and non-vegans to attend together, and we're going to be running that again. We'll let you know about that. We'll have that actually up on our websites when we're on our social media when it's
Great.
ready. But yeah, it was a workshop for vegans and non-vegans to attend together to learn how to relate and communicate more effectively for non-vegans who want to be allies to the vegans in their lives. So that was very exciting. And yeah, we're really excited about building out our Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, or CEVA, and offering more trainings in building relational skills and communication skills and advocacy skills.
Right.
Amazing.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
helpful, so inspiring.
Thank you.
And
Busy.
Yeah, thanks for what you're doing for the vegan community in general, for the world, for the vegan allies and people that don't even like vegans, they feel inspired just hearing you, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, thank you too, both of you. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for using your platform and reaching people and just keeping this conversation going and getting out there as widely as possible.
Thanks so much. And
Yeah,
thanks so much
pleasure.
for your time again, and enjoy the rest of your evening in
Yeah.
Germany.
You
Cheers.
too. Okay.
Yeah, cheers.
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 Ciao. Take care.